Hi there. There were some people that were interested in how I make my patches, so I thought I would do a little quick video explaining the materials and process I use. I won't do the digitising side of it because that's a whole other thing, but I'll do a different video explaining my settings and stuff a little bit later. So these are the finished patches. They're quite robust. They've got some weight to them. They're not very flimsy. So they have a layer of polycotton drill, which I use as scraps from my other costuming things. I have a layer of felt in the middle, and then on the back is a layer of iron-on stuff. I can't remember what it's called. It's like a it comes in sheets, and it's got a paper layer, and then it's got the iron-on layer, so I use that. Just like a big old sheet of those, and I buy those in bulk. So the interfacing I use, it's a tearaway medium. It's on a, excuse the mess, it's on a roll like that. And then these are the felts that I use. So I've kind of gone between different types of felt in the time that I've been doing this. I've been doing this about 1.5 years now, I think. But I tend to favour, it's this one here. So it's about 2 mil thick. It's quite flat, it's not very fluffy, and it's got some body to it. And this is good when I do like pin badges or things with solid stitching where there isn't really a background, it's all just stitches, because you don't end up with any of the problems that you get when you have like a looser weave fabric and the stitches go a little bit funny. So it's nice and solid, it holds weight on its own if I'm not putting any other fabrics with it. And then I have still used things like these though. So this was a multi-pack like kids craft when I wasn't able to get my usual like felt. So it's a lot thinner, it's about 1 mil, it's a bit more flimsy. And then this one I think was the same, but it's very fluffy and it's a little bit sort of, you can kind of pull it apart a bit, which is not ideal, but it does still work. I've also used things like fleece in the past, but that was kind of like I didn't have anything else kind of thing. So I tend to try and avoid using fleece, especially because I feel like it blunts the needles a lot quicker as well. For trimming things up, so I use these scissors. So these are curved cuticle scissors. They are vicious, but they are very sharp, and they mean that I can trim things. So like when I've got, so like this patch here I'm in the middle of doing, I can trim all these stupid little things away. I'm very much a perfectionist. As for the thing itself, so I use 2 layers of that interfacing and then a layer of net. So the net is, this one's black because I tend to use up what I've got in my sewing stash. Normally I would use white because it's a lot harder to see, but when I have patches like these where the border is black, it doesn't really make much of a difference. Yeah, so when I have it set up, I use the biggest hoop size because I make a lot of these patches. The net helps to, so the 2 layers of interfacing are to kind of stabilize it and make sure that it doesn't move, especially when it's doing the border. And the net means that it will hold. So in the past when I've done it, I found that it tends to move when it's doing the border stitches. So it'll like shrink down a lot more than if I didn't use the net. And there have also been problems where it's like ripped the interfacing because this is just like tear away. I don't use cutaway because it leaves too much of like there's too many little fluffy bits left over, whereas with the tearaway I can just like pull it off and then trim the net after, which I'll show in a minute. So when I do a thing, so that's my screen with my setup. So I'll do a border stitch as an example. So I only do the lock stitches at the beginning because it just helps to hold it down, and I don't want too much threads on that point because that's where everything stops and starts. So I'll get a little piece of, little scrap of felt and do this. Oh no, hang on, not you, stop that. I have to go back because I like to keep the file size small. So I'll go back to that. We'll do another border, holding that down. Do one more with the fabrics. So the fabrics that I use, they're all offcuts from my sewing stuff. So this is my box of scraps that I use. They can get quite small, but I tend to try and make things that will use these kinds of thing up, which is why I've got the really tiny little like shan't patches. So I literally just like keep all the scraps I have, and the majority of this is poly cotton drill, because the weave is quite it's quite a small weave, which is really great for making sure the stitching comes out clearly, and it's also quite hard wearing, so I tend to beat my with my patch jacket, I beat them up quite a lot, so they kind of got to stay put. Other fabrics I do have that I've used for purely for the colours, so that's just like a cotton, but for that I will put like a medium iron-on interfacing on before I do the stitching. And so like with this one, I think this was one of my early ones. I glued it. I used Pritt stick to glue the poly cotton fabric I wanted onto a tougher fabric. So I'm less likely to do this nowadays, but that's what I started doing with it, and it worked well enough. Also for larger patches, I will put interfacing on. So like with this one, for instance, it's curling, and it's kind of gone a little bit weird from the stitching, which is fine. Like it will. Once it's like stitched down and it's been ironed and everything, it's not a problem, but it just makes it a little bit wrinkly. So that's that. So then I will do, I think it's this colour. Also lint rollers are your friends. So then I will put that on there. It's gonna be difficult to hold down, but it should be a small one. I'll try and like hold it down while it stitches the outside stitching, just to make sure that it's flat. So then we've got this nice little thing, and then I will just stitch the patch, which I'll come back to in a minute. Okay, once all the patch has been sewn, like all the colours and stuff and the colour changes, I'll then trim around the edge with my vicious little tiny scissors. And then, so when I try and trim it as close as I possibly can, but obviously if it's like a weird shape or something, sometimes I'll trim the felt before I put the fabric on top, but for the most part, I just do it all together. When I make the design, when I digitize it, this border outline, I try and push a little bit further, like it's not dead center in the middle of the zigzag. It's actually a little bit further out towards the edge, because then that means that it accounts for shrinkage when the patch, like when the threads inevitably like shrink together, and it means that I can trim quite close without there being an issue of the fabric getting missed and stuff, like the little bit too close there, but that's fine. So then I'll put it back on, and I will do the, ooh, hard to do this one-handed. Okay, so I'll put it back on and I will set it to do the outside stitch. Okay, so this is now what we have. So this is the dehooped patches. I have trimmed away all of the excess that was holding it in the hoop. Sometimes I'll keep these to reuse, like I can glue the bigger pieces together and then use them as the top sheet on this, but that's a lot more time and things than I have time for right now, so I'm not doing that currently. But yeah, so now it is just a case of trimming, well, not trimming, but peeling off, tearing away the 2 layers of interfacing to leave the net, which I will do now because I can't do it with one hand. Now we have this. So it's like a, all the interfacing has been torn away, it's just the net left. So I will then separate all these out and then trim around the edges with some scissors, very, very, very carefully. Now we have these. So as you can see, the net is just sort of poking out. That's what the back looks like. Normally I would trim these up a lot more because the backs are a bit of a mess, but it doesn't really matter too much. And that's what it looks like after it's been trimmed. So it's sometimes, especially with like weird shapes, there'll be like little bits of net poking up and it can be a little bit rough, but because the net is so thin and it's not like a solid thing, it means that it's not really visible. So once it's sewn onto a thing, that's fine. I'll also usually go around the edge of these with some like appropriate coloured Sharpie, which maybe feels a bit like cheating, but I think it just neatens it up and makes it look a bit more cohesive. And then I'll trim all these threads and stuff. But yeah, so that's basically how I make patches. I'll go a bit more into the settings I use on Inkscape, Inkstitch at some other point when I've got my computer working. But yeah, that's how I make patches.